And following the 7-day ultimatum given the leaders to release detained President Bazoum to power and to quit, the Chiefs of Defense Staff of the West African sub-region have commenced a crucial meeting at the Defense Headquarters, with Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, chairing the meeting. The ECOWAS regional bloc meeting is expected to last for 2 days. Chiefs of Defense Staff of Niger, Ghana, the Gambia, Togo, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Cape Verde, Senegal, and Benin Republic and Guinea-Bissau are in attendance. Representatives from Niger, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea-Bissau were absent at the meeting. Also present was Commissioner for Political Affairs of ECOWAS. The military junta, on their part, had earlier expressed opposition to any aggression against Niger by regional or Western nations. Joining us from Washington, D.C. to discuss the latest on Niger's coup are co-founder Vanguard Africa, Christopher Musa, and global affairs analyst Sam Fati. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on The World Now. Let me begin with you, Sam. As it is, Niger's prime minister is stuck outside the country and is calling for international intervention to restore democracy in his country. But remember, the military junta there has spoken against any form of aggression from outside. How do you react to this irony playing out?
I believe ECOWAS is trying to take a very strong stand to say that they will not tolerate within the sub-region any act that is not democratic, any use of force to oust the government and replace it with a military junta, that the principle of ECOWAS will remain free and fair election in all of its member countries. Now, obviously, ECOWAS countries have signed different protocols, and one of these is to ensure that there's military intervention in times of crisis like this, Niger being one of them. So obviously, the prime minister can call for intervention. How and when this intervention is going to happen is very critical, because we're talking about soldiers coming up from other nations around the West African sub-region, having to go into Niger. Now, ECOWAS would need the support of the African Union and the United Nations to be able to execute such military intervention. I mean, we have seen them do something very similar, not to this kind of nature, because there's a factor here where you have other military juntas within the sub-region supporting Niger and saying that they will back them up. Now, the question remains whether they have the resources to do that. But we have seen ECOWAS do similar interventions in the Gambia and also in Guinea-Bissau as well. And they did it so successfully in a rather more peaceful manner, though, but it's still a military intervention.
All right, let me go to Christopher now. ECOWAS, AU, the EU have voiced concerns about the situation in Niger. But then how much really do you think they can do in restoring democratic governance to the republic? Christopher.
And thank you for the opportunity to be on your program today. The EU and the US have a vested interest in regional security, as well as they have an interest in democracy. And I think there's real challenges in the region. We've seen 7 coups, 3 successful over the last year and a half, 2 years. And the issue here is really applying pressure on the current government and really bridging that gap between the people, the military, and the democratic elected leaders. We have a lot of foreign influence in the region, particularly from ISIS, Boko Haram, some of the other terrorist organizations, as well as Wagner and the Russians. So I think a lot of interest has to be placed in the region by the EU and the US, and I think we have to be able to support really the regional groups like ECOWAS, the African Union, and we need to bolster support for them to strengthen their impact in the region. Otherwise, the people will continue to get hurt by these coups.
Well, staying with you, Christopher, some protesters in Niger were heard chanting, down with Russia, down with France, but long live Putin, long live Russia. What do you make of this growing anti-French sentiment and the support being extended to the Nigerian coup plotters by the Wagner mercenaries?
I think a lot of emphasis has been put on the economics of Africa, the mining, the rare earth minerals. Russia definitely, you see comments by the Kremlin, by the foreign minister, even by the Wagner head, You really see the influence that Russia is having in the region. It's really building upon the economic influence that China's had. And I think that there is a growing gap between those in the country that is afflicted and the youth and the leaders. And I also think that gap is growing between the democratically elected leaders and the military. And the U.S. and Europe have to put more of an emphasis on supporting these governments and pushing out elements of foreign actors, whether it's terrorists or it's Russian.
Well, let me now go back to Sam. Defense chiefs of ECOWAS countries are meeting in Nigeria's capital city. What resolutions do you expect them to come up with?
I think this is going to be very similar to the kind of decisions that were made when former Gambian President Yahya Jammeh decided that he was going to remain in power instead of vacating power. The resolution would be to, of course, they always try the diplomatic approach first, where other head of states would have to go into Niger and have discussions, including about returning to democracy, or probably help open elections, or a way to reinstall the former president, which I think is not going to be a no-go area. It's going to be a no-go area for the military. And if that doesn't work, then they would have to get soldiers from Nigeria, the Gambia, Ghana, Togo, other countries that have supported the military expedition, and they would have to go into Niger. But would that suffice? I do not think so, because what's going to happen then, obviously, the West African troops will need support from the EU, they will need support from the African Union, and they would obviously need support from the United States especially. And on the other hand, there's no doubt in my mind, if military action is taken, you would have Russia and the Wagner Group deeply involved, and then they would support governments, mainly Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and see as a way that those countries too can come together and also fight against the other West African troops. So, which to me, it's for lack of maybe better words to say, it's like sort of, we have a proxy war now, and then you have what would be considered the West and ECOWAS, and then you have Russia and the military juntas within the Sahel, going at it. And these are mostly French-speaking countries, French West African countries, which were former French colonies, that are witnessing a lot of these military takeovers that are currently happening. And it's becoming a pattern. So I think the West African leaders do realize the security threat that they do face. For example, Niger do share a very critical border around Borno State with Nigeria. And we know what that means in terms of the ISWAP and also Boko Haram. And those jihadist operations in the borders of Borno State. How critical is that to Nigeria's stability? How would it impact the economy moving forward? And what impact does that have on the rest of West Africa as well? I mean, we have seen terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso. We have seen them happen in Mali. And so when there is instability, it creates an incubator or a safe haven for terrorists to operate and destabilize our entire region.
And Sam, as it is, whether it's through sanctions or military intervention, you can tell that Nigerians are the ones bearing the brunt of this whole exercise. And aid is desperately needed. But how will the aid get to them when it does appear there isn't cooperation from the military junta in Niger?
Listen, right now it will be very difficult to get any collaboration with the junta, especially if this aid is coming from the West. They are trying to present themselves as anti-West and trying to fight neo-colonialism, etc. These are the theories that have been thrown out there. It has been the playbook of military rule and military government and takeovers in West Africa for a very, very long time. Perhaps society has forgotten so soon in about 2.5 decades or in 3 decades, and it's happening all over again. So it's the same excuses that we are seeing. It's also a war. It's also something that has a lot to do with the propaganda that they are selling out there. I mean, West African nations have done so much in ensuring democracy. ECOWAS, for example, trying to introduce 2-term limits and having countries ratify these 2-term limits regardless of what country it is, as long as you are within ECOWAS. So a lot of progress has been done, and we are seeing that progress being damaged steadily and gradually, right? And then these military juntas come up with all these propaganda messages, and they are trying to convince the citizens that everything that they've been doing, the governments have been doing, especially partnering with the West, is such a bad idea. But we must also remember as Africans that we voted each of these governments in. Even if the military decides to take up their uniform and run for office, we are putting them in. I think it's time for us to educate ourselves and take more responsibility rather than blaming the West or blaming Russia. As Africans, we have to start putting in the right people, and voting for the right people. We don't have to no longer vote based on tribes or based on what region we are from. We have to vote on people that are competent. It's the idea and the ideal of meritocracy that matters, and that should be the theme that we should be selling to our very own people. We can no longer blame colonialism. We can no longer blame anybody for what we are facing as a people. That responsibility lies on our shoulders.
All right, and finally to Chris, it's very important now to de-escalate tension in Niger and, of course, to entrench democracy, not just in that part of the continent, but in the entire continent. How do you think, this can be achieved?
I think Sam, in some of the words he said about supporting democracy, supporting the will of the people, getting them aid. I think stability in these countries is critical. And I really think that what Sam is saying here about Africa needs to take responsibility for their democracy. The people need to take responsibility for their democracy. That the U.S. and Europe can stand behind the regional leaders in ECOWAS and in the African Union, and we can help strengthen those organizations. Because at the end of the day, it's the African people that really need to be supported, and it doesn't need to be coming to the auspices that can be exploited under colonialism or foreign actors. And really, the region needs help fighting terrorism. They need economic influence, foreign direct investment. But really, we need stronger African leadership on the continent to deter such aggression.
Stronger African leadership in the continent. I must sincerely appreciate you both gentlemen for joining us on the program. Co-founder, Vanguard Africa, Christopher Harvin, and the global affairs analyst, Sam Fatia. Thank you for your time on The World Now.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.